It started as a normal Tuesday, until a plane tore through the sky and into the heart of New York City. What happened next would change the world forever. In just a matter of minutes, chaos erupted as the Twin Towers were struck, one after another. The world watched in horror as the skyline became a symbol of devastation. This is not just history. This is the real, minute-by-minute story of 9/11, told exactly how it happened, from the first strike to the aftermath that reshaped the world forever. It began like any ordinary Tuesday. The date was September 11, 2001. The sun rose over New York City, casting a golden hue over the skyline. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures, nothing out of the ordinary. People headed to work, boarded subways, grabbed coffee, and made their way to offices in the towering World Trade Center. There was no warning, no alert, just the calm before the most devastating storm in modern American history. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston Logan Airport, bound for Los Angeles. The passengers, most unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold, settled into their seats. What no one knew was that 5 hijackers, armed and prepared for what was to come, had already seized control of the cockpit. They diverted the plane's course, and it began heading straight for New York City. Within minutes, the aircraft disappeared. From radar and air traffic controllers, confused and unable to reach the pilots, were left in the dark. At 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 followed close behind, also taking off from Boston. This flight, like the first, was bound for Los Angeles. But as with the previous plane, hijackers had already overtaken it. The details of this coordinated attack remained unclear to the public, but the results were unmistakable. 2 planes, 2 hijackings, and a world about to be changed forever. Then, at 8:46 a.m., the unimaginable happened. American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The plane hit between the 93rd and 99th floors, tearing a massive hole in the building and sending flames and smoke billowing into the sky. Those inside were trapped, and anyone in the surrounding area could only watch in horror as the tower began to burn. The shock waves from the explosion rattled buildings miles away. The news began to spread quickly. This was no accident. Just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., the second blow came. United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. The entire world watched in disbelief as the plane tore into the building, confirming that this was an act of terrorism. Panic spread, and confusion turned to fear. The United States was under attack. The Twin Towers, symbols of America's economic strength, were being torn apart right before the eyes of the world. And this was only the beginning. At 9:03 a.m., the world watched in horror as United Airlines Flight 175, hijacked just like Flight 11, tore through the sky and slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact was catastrophic, sending a massive fireball erupting from the building as a plume of smoke swallowed the lower half of Manhattan. In the span of seconds, the scene on live television went from confusion to absolute certainty. This was no accident. It wasn't a tragic mistake. America was under attack. On the streets below, people screamed in disbelief, their eyes locked on the sky above as the horror unfolded. Those who were close to the Twin Towers had nowhere to hide. First responders, already on the scene from the first impact, rushed to help. But there was no way to prepare for what was coming next. In the span of 17 minutes, the unimaginable had become the reality. And New York City, once the pinnacle of American pride, had now become ground zero of an assault that would change everything. The world saw the unimaginable on their screens, but those trapped inside the towers felt the earth-shattering tremors as both planes struck. The force was so violent it rattled the city blocks, causing windows to shatter miles away. For the hundreds of people inside the South Tower, the realization hit them in a flash. Escape was not possible. The stairwells were blocked, The elevators, disabled, and the walls were buckling under the heat. Those still alive in the upper floors could only pray that help was on the way, but even the emergency systems couldn't have prepared for the sheer magnitude of destruction unfolding around them. As news stations scrambled to piece together the details, the American government was caught off guard, unsure of how to respond. President George W. Bush, who had been reading to children in Florida, was quickly ushered to a secure location. The nation was in shock, and no one, not even the most seasoned experts, knew the full scope of the attack, or how much worse it might get. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, the heart of the U.S. military, chaos had also erupted. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, which had been hijacked by 5 al-Qaeda operatives, crashed into the western side of the building. The explosion tore through the reinforced steel and concrete, killing 125 people inside, along with all 64 on board the plane. The shockwave from the impact was felt throughout the capital, and Washington was plunged into darkness as part of the federal government's emergency protocols kicked in. For the first time in history, the Pentagon, symbol of American military might, was under attack. Back in New York, a palpable sense of fear and confusion hung over the city. Emergency personnel worked tirelessly to evacuate those who could escape, but it was a race against time. People who had made it out of the towers looked back, helpless, as the buildings they had once worked in began to collapse, one after another. The North Tower fell at 10:28 a.m. after burning for over an hour. The devastation was unimaginable. Millions of people around the world were watching, but for the survivors on the streets below, the reality was far worse. The sound of the buildings, crumbling, reverberated for miles. People wept, unable to comprehend the scale of the destruction. The collapse of the Twin Towers marked a pivotal moment in history. An era of false security shattered forever. The attack had proven that no place, not even the most iconic symbols of American power, was safe. It wasn't just a blow to a building. It was a message to the entire world. America was vulnerable, and it was under attack. In the midst of the chaos, the heroism of ordinary people shone through. Those who had survived the collapse, the emergency responders risking their lives to save others, and the brave passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 who fought back against their hijackers. All of them became part of a narrative of survival, courage, and loss that would define the days and years to come. But for now, in the streets of Manhattan and the shattered Pentagon, all anyone could do was wonder, what would happen next? At 9:59 a.m., just 56 minutes after being struck, the South Tower of the World Trade Center began to collapse. It started with a deep, thunderous rumble that echoed through lower Manhattan. The top of the building began to tilt slightly, almost imperceptibly at first, and then, without warning, it crumbled in on itself like a controlled demolition. Floor after floor pancaked downward with unimaginable force, sending a tsunami of ash, steel, and shattered concrete cascading through the city streets. A massive cloud of dust and debris exploded outward, swallowing everything in its path. Cars, people, buildings, until all that was left was darkness and silence. In a matter of seconds, one of the tallest skyscrapers on Earth had vanished, leaving behind only a smoking ruin. People on the ground ran in every direction, some screaming, others frozen in disbelief. Emergency responders, already exhausted and covered in soot from the rescue efforts, rushed toward the danger rather than away from it. Firefighters, police officers, and paramedics formed human chains to lead survivors out of the wreckage, even as falling debris continued to rain down around them. Many of them knew they wouldn't make it out, but they went anyway. They were fighting not just for lives, but for every second of hope they could cling to in the chaos. Inside the North Tower, panic turned to desperation. Those trapped above the impact zone, some 1,000 feet in the air, were running out of time and options. The stairwells were gone, the elevators destroyed. The smoke was thick, the heat unbearable. People leaned out of broken windows, waving shirts and jackets in a desperate plea for rescue. Some called loved ones, leaving final messages that still echo through history. And some, faced with no other way out, jumped, falling hundreds of feet in front of a helpless crowd below. It was a scene so unimaginable, it burned itself into the memory of every person who witnessed it. At 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93, hijacked and believed to be en route to another high-profile target in Washington, D.C., crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But this crash was different. The passengers on board had learned of the other attacks via phone, calls with loved ones. Knowing what awaited them, they fought back. A group of brave men and women stormed the cockpit, sacrificing themselves to prevent the terrorists from reaching their destination. The plane never made it to Washington. Every life on board was lost, but their defiance likely saved countless others. They were the first counterattack of a war that had just begun. Back in New York, just 29 minutes after the fall of the South Tower, the North Tower began to collapse at 10:28 a.m. It fell with the same deafening roar, sending up another, blinding cloud of smoke and dust. The Twin Towers were gone. Thousands were dead. First responders, office workers, airline passengers, military personnel, all taken in an attack so devastating it felt unreal. But it wasn't. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in human history, and it had unfolded live before a watching world. The skyline had changed. The country had changed. And in that moment, the entire course of the 21st century shifted. Smoke still hung in the air as silence fell over Ground Zero. The once mighty Twin Towers were gone, replaced by a smoldering mountain of steel and ash. Streets once bustling with life were now unrecognizable, covered in dust, debris, and the shattered remains of what had been. First responders dug through the rubble with bare hands, searching desperately for survivors. Some cried out names, others simply worked in silence, knowing time was running out. The air was thick, toxic, and the only sounds were the distant wails of sirens, the buzz of helicopters above, and the heavy machinery beginning to arrive in waves. But beneath the chaos, something else stirred. Grief, yes, but also a sense of unity that hadn't been seen in decades. Across the country, people stopped. Offices emptied, schools shut down, flights grounded. Every screen played the same footage. The towers falling, the Pentagon burning, the smoldering field in Pennsylvania. For a brief moment, the United States stood still. Strangers hugged on street corners. Families clung to each other. And millions of eyes, still in disbelief, watched President George W. Bush address the nation that night. His words were solemn, yet firm. "Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings," he said, "but they cannot touch the foundation of America." In those first hours after the attack, anger had not yet fully arrived. What came first was mourning. Vigils were held in every city. Candles lit sidewalks. Flags appeared on every porch, every car window. Blood donation centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. In New York, exhausted firefighters refused to leave the site, digging non-stop in hopes of finding someone, anyone, alive beneath the wreckage. They would continue for weeks. But the stories emerging weren't just of loss. They were of heroism. Office workers who carried strangers down 80 flights of stairs. A man in a wheelchair saved by his colleagues. Firefighters who ran into the towers knowing they may never come back out. And of course, the passengers of Flight 93, whose final act of courage likely saved the Capitol or the White House from destruction. As the dust settled, the world changed. Airports became fortresses. The U.S. launched the war on terror. Troops were deployed. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the attacks, became the most hunted man on earth. Fear lingered in airports, in public spaces, in every unattended bag or sudden loud sound. But so did resolve. America, wounded but standing, promised never to forget. Every year on the anniversary, names are read aloud at the memorial in Manhattan, a solemn reminder of that day. But even 2 decades later, the images remain vivid. The shock, the collapse, the courage. This is more than a story. It's a turning point in history, a moment burned into the memory of a generation, and it deserves to be remembered not just for the pain, but for the strength that followed. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what was lost and what was found in those dark hours, then please, like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more real stories that shaped our world. Your support helps keep history alive.